Hello, welcome to this Model Hovercraft Association tutorial video on how to design a bag skirt pattern for a model hovercraft using Autodesk Fusion 360, which is free for personal use, and some other free and open source software. Before I start, it's worth pointing out that the principles used in this video can be used with other software, and that this is not the only method that can be used to design a skirt. I'm assuming that you're familiar with basic CAD tools and are reasonably familiar with Fusion 360, although that is not essential. For this demonstration, I've created a simple hole structure in Fusion to base the skirt on, but this process can be applied to almost any shape. You'll notice I've used straight sides for simplicity, but I'll explain how you can use this for curved platform holes as well later on. The basic process is to create a skirt profile and sweep it along the perimeter line of the hull. So to begin, make sure your hull has a flat, continuous perimeter line that you can use for the sweep tool. Next, you need to create the skirt profile. The profile I've used here is based on the R1-R2 ratio of 1:2, where the radius R1 is equal to the hull depth and radius R2 is twice that. The first arc is centered in line with the edge of the hull and sweeps 180 degrees. The second arc is centered on the hull perimeter and connects between the first arc and the base of the hull. As my hull is 40 mm deep, R1 is 40 and R2 is 80. Once you're happy with your profile, you need to create the sweep within the surface tools. It's important you use the surface and not the solid sweep tool. To create the sweep, select the profile and then use the hull perimeter as the guide path. You may need to select it in sections to make a complete path around the hull. When it's created, you will have a single surface body. This is no good for the next step, so first we need to unstitch the surface. Use the Unstitch tool and select the surface. Once you've done this, you'll notice that each section is in two parts. We need the sections to be a single surface, so we need to restitch the parts for each section. Go ahead and use the Stitch tool, selecting each pair of surfaces per section. Once done, you should have the same number of surfaces as the hull has sides. The next step is to save your design and then export the surface as an OBJ file. Go down to the File menu, select Export and then select OBJ from the drop-down. This will export the surfaces but uses Autodesk servers to do it. You may have to wait a while as it uploads, processes and then downloads the resultant file. Once done, you need to launch Meshmixer. This is a free tool also from Autodesk. The interface is a little confusing if you've not used it before. The first task is to import the file you just exported from Fusion. Select the Import button and then browse to the folder where you saved your exported OBJ file and select it. Once it imports, you may find the mesh is oriented differently to how it is in Fusion. This is because Meshmixer is geared up for 3D printer use and switches the Z and Y axes. It doesn't matter for our purposes. When the mesh is imported, it comes in as a single unit, so the first thing you need to do is to separate the individual parts. Go to the Edit menu and then select the mesh and click Separate Shells. It will take a few moments, but once done, you will see the object browser appear, which shows all the separate meshes. You can hide the hull at this point by clicking the relevant mesh and then the eye icon next to the mesh in the browser. Now we need to flatten each section of the skirt. In the case of this model, the skirt is symmetrical, so we only need to flatten one side, one end and one corner. Obviously, if your design is asymmetrical, you'll need to flatten all the unique sections. Select the mesh you want to flatten, then select the Unwrap button in the Edit menu. Use the Rigid option. By default, this will place the flattened shape on the XY plane. Repeat this process for all the sections. You may then want to move them apart, as they will likely be overlaid on top of each other, but it's not necessary for the next step. Once you have flattened your shapes, you just need to select each one in turn and then go to the File menu and then select Export SVG. When you do, select Inkscape SVG, unless you happen to have Illustrator, and give it an appropriate file name. When you've created all your SVG files, you'll need to open Inkscape, which is a free open source vector illustration package. In Inkscape, it's simply a case of importing each SVG one at a time and then modifying the shape to add a joining strip along each edge. The way to do this is to first break the shape at the corners. Before you do this, you may want to set the shape fill to empty. Use the Node Edit tool, then select the node at each corner and use the Break at Selected Node button. Once you've done this, you'll need to break the shape apart from the Path menu. After this, you can select each line and duplicate it by right-clicking and select Duplicate, or by pressing Ctrl D. Then it's just a case of moving the duplicated line offset from the original one a sufficient distance to allow for joining. You can use the arrow keys to move the line perpendicularly and with fine control. Do the same for each line and then join the newly spaced lines with short connecting lines, which will snap to the line ends. When you've finished, it's just a case of printing out your pattern to use for cutting your skirt sections. Now, depending on the size of your model, you may find the skirt sections do not fit onto a single page. In this case, when you import the section, simply add extra registration lines or marks and then do the same process. But when it comes to printing, you'll need to move the pattern around on the page such that the registration marks stay visible. Then print off the pages to make a complete pattern by overlapping the pages, lining up the registration marks. Now this process will work for most hull shapes, but if you have a curved plan shape, you'll need to create an approximation line on your model made up of straight sections before you create the surface sweep. This ensures that the skirt sections remain flat in the lateral dimension, which is important to enable successful flattening in Meshmixer without distortion. To do this in Fusion, you can create a sketch which projects the outline of the hull. Then use the Line tool and, working from the centre of each curved section, draw lines of fixed length that are coincident with the curve and work your way along the curve until you get to the next straight section. I recommend you make the last section join to the node of the straight section rather than being a fixed length to make a neater skirt shape and to be easier to join and cut. Don't forget to delete the curves from your sketch before you finish it. This is because if you don't, when you come to create the sweep, it will tend to follow the curve line rather than the straight sections you've just created. Be aware that the very tight curves, as in curved corners, if you put too many short sections in, you will find the skirt doesn't join to the whole. In this example, I've done this, and you can see the resultant skirt makes an awkward join. In practice, I would probably just do 2 sections across the corner at most. So that concludes this short tutorial on designing bag skirt patterns for model hovercraft using some free tools. I hope it's been useful, but please feel free to leave comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the MHA channel. Also consider joining our Facebook group or becoming a club member. Thanks for watching.